Able Trust believes is important to the recovery and the strengthening of Florida's economy. So we're excited that we have over 300 people registered today from across the state. This includes business leaders, HR professionals, employment service providers, and policymakers. We recognize that many of you may be new to the world of the Able Trust, so I'm going to give you just a brief background on our organization. The Able Trust is an independent nonprofit endowment foundation. We're dedicated to providing Floridians with disabilities opportunities for successful employment. The Able Trust supports numerous workforce development projects and career preparation programs for students and adults with a broad range of differing abilities. We also provide assistance to businesses as they are seeking to employ people with disabilities. Our Business Leadership Network and Resource Library are designed to help businesses remove barriers and to engage with all of Florida's talent pool. We have a long history of charitable giving. We were established in 1990 by the Florida legislature, and over the past 30 years, we've worked with organizations in every county in Florida to put literally thousands of people with disabilities to work. We consider ourselves the community foundation for the disabled community, and we always invite you to be a part of our very important work. So today's event, The New Landscape of Florida's Workforce for Today and Tomorrow, is the first of many business-focused webinars that we have planned over the next few months. It also happens to coincide with the 30th anniversary of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is officially marked on this Sunday, July 26th. So we know that much progress has been made toward fulfilling the promises of the ADA, but we also recognize that there's still much work to be done. So in today's event, we're going to focus on the ever-evolving economy and labor market in Florida that we're all experiencing through the pandemic, and how those changes affect your work as business leaders as you're trying to recover through the pandemic, and more specifically, as professionals working to achieve a diverse and inclusive workforce here in Florida. We're also going to learn from the insights of Florida's HR leaders and how they're continuing to value and emphasize diversity and inclusion even during these most challenging times. So today, during our discussion, we invite you to tweet it out using @AbleTrust and the hashtags for this event, which are #NewFloridaLandscape, #AbleNetwork, and #FutureOfWork. We also encourage you to engage in the discussion today using the Q&A feature here on Zoom. We're going to address as many questions as we possibly can at the end of today's presentations, but just in case we don't have time to get to all of your questions, I want to remind you to submit your questions using your name and not anonymously, so that we can follow up with you individually after the webinar to make sure that we address your questions. We also invite you to use the chat feature and make sure that you have it set to all panelists and attendees so that everybody attending today can see your comments. Before I introduce our first speaker, I want to take a moment to thank all of you who participated in the recent Disability Inclusion and Employment Trends survey that we did here at the Able Trust. We really believe that it yielded a very valuable amount of information about Florida's commitment to a diverse and inclusive workforce. And as a participant in today's webinar, you will receive a full report of the survey results in August. But this morning, we're going to give you a few sneak peeks at some of the survey highlights. And just to give you a little bit of context for the data, Florida currently has 4.98 million people who are living with a disability, which is just under 23% of the total population. So we had over 600 responses to the Employment Trends survey, which we were really excited about and appreciate all of you helping us get the word out. Of those responses, 48%, or just less than half, said that their organization has formal policies in place for diversity and inclusion. And 81% of those who have diversity and inclusion policies said that their policies provide guidance on hiring people with disabilities. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. As our survey data reflects, this is a really important time for our human resource leaders to be speaking out and taking action on how diversity and inclusion can help bring about positive change in Florida's workforce. While we're all planning for what's next, we know that diversity and inclusion is a critical part of the solution. So with us today is the very respected leader of all HR professionals in the state, Heather Deyrieux. Heather is the president of HR Florida, which is the statewide umbrella for all of the local chapters of the Society of Human Resource Managers throughout the state. Heather's known affectionately by her colleagues as HD, and I'm really thrilled to welcome her here today to learn from her insights as she's leading Florida's HR professionals through the myriad of decisions they're having to make, new policies they're having to develop and implement, and the many questions that continue to arise from the new COVID-19 workplace. HD, I welcome you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Allison, and good morning, everyone. Going to pull up my slides here as we transition. Okay, so as Allison shared, I'm part of the HR Florida State Council, honored to serve as a volunteer leader as the president of the association, and we work as a liaison between SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, the global mothership for HR, as I like to call them, and our 28 chapters that you see on the map here. Florida is a very large state, so we have chapters all the way from the Panhandle down to the Keys. If you're not involved in your local chapter, certainly invite you to our website to get some more information, as they're a wonderful resource for you. If you're not familiar with HR Florida, we recently updated our mission and vision at the beginning of 2019, and I wanted to share that here. The HR Florida mission is to serve, advise, and empower Florida workforce communities through education, partnerships, and connections, which is exactly what we're doing here today. And HR Florida's vision is to lead the way and make Florida the best place to work. And we mean the best place to work for all people. So diversity and inclusion is very important to us. So let's talk a bit about inclusion and diversity, because I like to put inclusion first. So the definition of diversity, according to SHRM, is the collective mixture of differences and similarities that includes, for example, individual and organizational characteristics, values, beliefs, experiences, backgrounds, preferences, and behaviors. Inclusion is the achievement of work environment in which all individuals are treated fairly and respectfully, have equal access to opportunities and resources, and can contribute fully to the organization's success. Or, as Liz shared here, I think a lot of people have seen this quote before, diversity is having a seat at the table, inclusion is having a voice, and belonging is having that voice be heard. And that's really the key, is to not only have the diversity, but to get to inclusion and then move towards belonging. As Allison mentioned, we have the 30th anniversary of the ADA, and it's also the 100th anniversary of the Vocational Rehabilitation Program. So very exciting times and certainly very timely for this webinar. As a resource to HR professionals and business leaders across the state of Florida, I wanted to share some things that you might not be aware of or might not be taking advantage of at this time. There's a great program through Employ Florida called Florida Abilities Work. You can find more information at abilitieswork.employflorida.com. You'll see the link there. They offer recruitment services, tax credits for employers, apprenticeships, and on-the-job training. So this is a great way to get more people into your organization. Recruiting is always an interesting area, and they're certainly here to help. Last year, HR Florida also partnered with NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and they do have a Florida chapter as well as representatives around the state. If you're interested in getting more information about NAMI, their website is at the bottom of the screen. Last year, as HR Florida partnered with NAMI, we had Stigma Free Florida, and their Stigma Free campaign is still active today. And you'll see in the green box on the left, you can sign up to take the pledge. The Stigma Free campaign is NAMI's effort to end stigma and create hope for those affected by mental illness. Through powerful words and actions, we can shift the social and systematic barriers for those living with mental health conditions. Another item that might be new to some of those on the webinar today, the SHRM Foundation, which is an arm of the SHRM, a National Society, has come up with a new certificate called Employing Abilities at Work. You can go to their website and find out more information about this certificate, which is open to everyone, whether you're a business leader or HR professional. It's a great program and certainly provides some wonderful information about this workplace initiative. So how to get started if you don't currently have an inclusion and diversity plan within your organization? First, you need to find out where you are. You have to know where you're starting from in order to provide any sort of program within your company. Next, I suggest forming a committee. We're actually in the process of doing this with my paid employer right now. And we put out an application to our entire organization to find out why inclusion and diversity is important to you and why they want to be part of that committee or advisory board. And next, you can establish some goals. So the organization is already coming up with our own goals of what we'd like to do with our advisory group, but we want to make sure that the committee or advisory group is part of that goal setting so that we can make sure we incorporate that into the plan as well. I was also asked to share some rehiring trends and reopening of Florida, so we'll move to that next. First, if you're not familiar, the Florida Chamber of Commerce has a Relaunch Florida campaign going on at this time. You'll see the snapshot here talking about uniting business for good to relaunch Florida's economy, and you can sign up for their news alerts. They've done a wonderful job of sharing information throughout our COVID climate that we've been in for many, many months now, and then taking it the next step to how can we really open Florida back up for business and save the companies that we have within our state. They're also starting a Florida Business Leaders Summit on prosperity and economic development. Their first of the 5-part webinar series actually was yesterday, but you can sign up for the rest of the courses. The one specifically about jobs and education is coming up on Wednesday, August 12th from 10 a.m. to noon, as you'll see at the bottom of the screen. These are free webinars, and again, great information, and certainly encourage the partnership with the Chamber. And more information on their COVID-19 resources. Not only is HR Florida and SHRM here as a resource for you, again, the Florida Chamber has wonderful information about COVID-19. This is a snapshot specifically of their response pages with a lot of frequently asked questions. And I encourage you to look at the information here, which is updated on a daily basis. You can also sign up for alerts via email too. So some new laws and workforce issues. FMLA has been around forever, but you might not be familiar. We now have EFMLA, or the emergency FMLA leave, which is part of the FFCRA, which came as the Florida Family Coronavirus Relief Act. These are ever changing as the information came out. They changed the laws and recommendations multiple times. I think we've reached a point where things have steadied out a bit, but as we are still in the thick of this crisis, who knows what's going to happen next? And that affects all of our employees throughout the state. So if you're not familiar with this information, please take a look at the websites available, or again, reach out to HR Florida or your local chapter for additional details. I-9 verifications was something that was provided some flexibility for some time. So as hopefully you all know, being in business or in HR, we have to confirm the identities of our new employees. And there's specific documents and timelines in which we need to do those. They provided some flexibility during our COVID crisis that we were allowed to accept items electronically. The deadline for that stopped, but then as things normally do, they have extended that for another 30 days. So if you did not get that news alert, I wanted to share that good news that we have 30 additional days through August 19th now, so I guess a little bit less, to provide the electronic verifications. Of course, we will need the physical verifications later on, so make sure that you are still keeping in touch with your employees so that you can get that information and verify those identities. I wanted to talk about the importance of a COOP plan, or continuity of operations. This is an exercise that, again, we've done in my paying career with Sarasota County, where we've had plans for hurricanes and other emergencies and natural disasters and other things that could happen within our community. And there was certainly some information there about pandemics, but not to the extent that we probably needed based off of the situation that we're now in. So if you don't have a COOP plan or you're looking at updating yours, I definitely recommend you take a more global view of being able to incorporate pandemics and other situations into that planning. Lastly, I wanted to mention our unions. Now, this varies per area, but a lot of the unions have provided some flexibility or the ability to press the pause button, so to speak, with negotiations and other things. But again, if you have any questions on this, please make sure that you're reaching out to your HR team, HR Florida, or SHRM so that we can assist you there. So I wanted to open up a poll, which we'll do in a moment, and find out what concerns you most about the return to work. A, safety, B, employees back in the office, C, benefits, D, compensation, or E, communication. And we'll give everybody a few moments to respond.
Hello, everybody. The poll, you should see the poll now if you are on a computer. We're just going to give you guys about 30 seconds to answer the question. 15 more seconds for everybody.
Okay, and as expected, safety is number one, which is great to see because that is one of our primary functions as businesses, but specifically in HR. So we're going to talk about all 5 of these very briefly here. All right, so some tips for a safer return to work since safety is number one. A couple things to consider. Some organizations are doing health screenings. This is an interesting area, to say the least, of what kind of screenings do you do and what are you allowed to do under the law? What's the best for your employees? What's the best for your customers? I'm a Orange Theory fitness enthusiast, and I can tell you that every time you walk into the gym, they do a temporal temperature screening to make sure that you are within the correct range. And they do that for their coaches as well as all of the members coming in for classes. I know some employers are putting in scanning either done by a human or by machine as you're coming into the office. Other companies are asking health questions as they're returning to the office. You know, how are you feeling today? Do you have any of these symptoms? Have you traveled to any of these areas? And it's important to keep up with the latest information from the CDC because, again, it's changing at least daily, if not more frequently. The next consideration is PPE. We've been hearing a lot about PPE or personal protective equipment in the news, and there was a shortage for a while. We've caught up in most areas for at least the basics. Is this something that you'll provide for your employees? Can you do that as a resource so that it's free to them? Is this something that you can provide at a discount? What is your policy about wearing masks and when to wear masks or gloves or other equipment? You need to make sure that you have this information available to your employees to provide that peace of mind to them and your customers returning back. I also recommend that you have an exposure response plan if you don't have one already. Unfortunately, it's a question of when, not if, for most businesses that someone, whether it's an employee or a customer, is probably going to test positive if you haven't had this already. So what is your response plan for each of those different scenarios? If you already have your plan in place, once that happens, you're able to activate that rather than trying to come up with the plan and then move into action. Let's talk about the work. So actually bringing employees back to the workplace. If you're recalling employees, you need to ask the 5 questions of who, what, where, when, and how. A lot of our employees were either sent to do remote work or might have been laid off or other cut down on hours or different scenarios. So as you're bringing your employees back, will everyone come back? What does that look like? Are they working in the office or different locations? Are you doing split shifts or a shared schedule throughout the week? And how will all of that work? These are questions that your employees are going to ask, so it's better to have that plan ahead of time. And again, remote work. If that wasn't already something that you've implemented, is that something you can do now? Or is it something that you can consider keeping as you move into the future? Even past coronavirus time, is that something that has been worthwhile for your organization? Most companies are finding that they're getting more work and better work done by their employees at this time. And speaking about diversity and inclusion, this is a very easy way to provide accommodations. You might have great talent that already has accommodations set up in their home and is able to do great work for you. They already have their setup and they're ready and willing. So this is a great time to try them out and see, is this a good fit for them? Next, you need to think about your benefits. Is there any change to healthcare eligibility if you cut down on worker hours? And when will they be eligible again? Do they have flexible spending accounts, and what kind of expenses are eligible under your FSA? With your 401k or pension plans, were there any changes based off of their status with the company or again, the hours that they've done? Will you make any changes with your paid leave? Are they allowed to use paid leave? As we are in a tight time right now, and maybe you've had a hiring freeze or not able to hire as many people, are you allowing your employees to use their vacation? Or do they even want to use it because they can't go anywhere and they've already been having a staycation? So it's a good thing to consider of how will that look, and maybe you'll roll over some of that leave for a longer time period. And if you have an EAP, an employee assistance program of any sort, now's a great time to make sure that your employees are aware of that and all of the resources available. Most EAPs have some sort of counselor available and mental health options, maybe meditation or exercise, which are all great ways to cope with our current situation, as well as thinking from a diversity and inclusion standpoint as well. Compensation. Again, I mentioned reduced hours, or did you reduce your pay for anyone? Will you be able to pay bonuses this year? Will you be doing annual increases or merit increases? And will you be offering hazard pay as employees come back to work? So make sure that you have a plan for each of these things, because I guarantee your employees will be asking. And lastly, communication, communication, communication. Two of my favorite words are communication and expectations. Again, your employees need this information from you, so it's much better as HR professionals and other business leaders to put this information out in front of them ahead of time so that they're not asking these questions or speculating on your answers. A couple other items to consider with communication. Make sure you're telling your employees to stay at home if they are not feeling well. That is the biggest tip at this time, that if you don't feel well, please, please, please stay at home. Make sure that you're providing training to your employees, and that can be done remotely at this time. And the training should be both on our COVID climate that we're in, as well as diversity and inclusion and a variety of other topics. So training is a wonderful way for people to gain a better understanding of their colleagues, of the world in general. So if you have an in-house training or access to training that your employees can take advantage of, make sure they have that detail. Again, we talked about the exposure plan, and then changes, just letting them know that the only constant in life is change. We're change agents working in HR, so anything that we can do to support them with changes that are coming within our organization is going to help them out. And lastly, keep calm and call HR. So if you do have any questions, again, HR Florida is here as a resource for you. SHRM is here as a resource, or any of the other organizations that I've highlighted today. But if we can help you out in any way, please reach out to us, or please reach out to your local chapter.
Thank you so much, Heather. Really great information. I specifically really appreciate the guidance that you are given to business leaders about how to start the conversation specific to diversity and inclusion in their work. And I also want to remind everybody, we've had a couple of questions because you had so many great resources available to the audience, that the webinar recording as well as the slides will be available on our website next week. And at the end of today's presentation, I'm going to give you some more contact information to the audience if you have a direct question for Heather. So, moving on. Before we move to our next speaker, we have some more survey results that we want to share. And as a reminder, we had over 600 people participate in the survey. So one of the questions that was asked about the importance that Florida employers place on diversity and inclusion in their hiring practices, one of the questions that was asked about the importance that Florida employers place on diversity and inclusion in their hiring practices. And 87% identified diversity and inclusion as important, and 49% reported it as significant to their hiring decisions. 23% said they would place more emphasis on diversity and inclusion as they're hiring and rehiring through the pandemic, and 63% said they would place about the same emphasis as they did prior to the pandemic. So we see these results as really positive for a continued emphasis on diversity and inclusion, and also on bringing in a variety of talent to the workforce, including persons with disabilities, older workers, and others who are differently abled. So most of us are well aware that during times of high stress, such as what we're going through now around the world and here in Florida, there's a sense of urgency that's related to decision making. And oftentimes, the pace that we're having to make decisions can increase our risks when we aren't fully considering all of the consequences. So one of the things that we know that can help us to mitigate risk and be better decision makers, particularly in stressful times, is having reliable data and information. So today we are so fortunate to have a leader like Adrienne Johnston, who serves as the Chief of Workforce Statistics with the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity. Adrienne and her team are responsible for so much of the data that we're seeing every day on the news, and that's helping to drive our economic recovery here in the state. Adrienne's presentation today is going to focus on the current conditions of Florida's labor market, which includes industries that have been most impacted by COVID-19 and how they're recovering. She's also going to explore how consumers have responded to sudden changes in income through the data on sentiment and spending patterns. So I want to welcome Adrienne, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hi, good morning. Let me just switch over to my screen, just a minute. Okay, good morning, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you. As Allison mentioned, I am the Bureau Chief of Workforce Statistics and Economic Research with the Department of Economic Opportunity. Our Bureau is responsible for producing data and statistics related to Florida's labor market, including key economic indicators that we release monthly. So I'm going to start with those indicators first, and then share some more broad economic information related to how individuals have reacted to the current environment from a consumer perspective. So first we have here the state's unemployment rate, and this is a historical view of what our unemployment rate has looked like in Florida back to 1999. And as you can see, we just announced that Florida's unemployment rate in June was 10.4%. And this is a decline of 3.3 percentage points from May. But I think this graph also very clearly shows that we basically went from a historic low unemployment rate in February, below 3%, to a historic high, even higher than the Great Recession, in just a couple of months. So it really shows the dramatic change in our labor market in a very short period of time. I also wanted to point out, so our statistics are produced through a cooperative agreement with the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. And they've been very upfront and transparent about the fact that the estimates for unemployment rate have actually been lower than they probably should be. So they've had some misclassification issues on their survey. And so we know that even as this is a very dramatic change and a relatively high unemployment rate in our state and in the country, it's actually probably a little bit higher than what we're reporting here. So I just wanted to share that with you. I think that that's just an important factor to know. I also wanted to highlight another data point that we released on Friday, and that's our total employment data. So while we track the unemployment rate, which is related to individuals and how they're connected to the labor market, this particular data set focuses on the employer, and it gives us a sense of how businesses are doing. This is the top level trend, and you can see again a very dramatic decline in April, where we lost about 1 million jobs, and that represents about 5 years of job gains that we had after the Great Recession. The good news is that as of June, the jobs started to come back. So as the state started to reopen, we actually saw that half of those jobs that were lost in April and May had actually come back. So we made significant gain there. And we will know, of course, a lot more about this, how things are progressing when we release the July data. We had, towards the end of June, some businesses were closing back down, particularly bars. But we also had large employers in our state reopen. So a lot of the theme parks started to open up in July. So we'll see how that impacts both the unemployment rate and employment data in the middle of August. One of the nice things about this particular data set is it lets us really break things down by industry and understand which particular businesses were impacted most. So this graphic here shows us very clearly that it was leisure and hospitality businesses that had the largest losses in employment due to COVID-19. Following that, we had professional and business services, and a lot of that was driven by temporary work. But also there were other businesses impacted. You can see retail trade, and I think interestingly, education and health services were significantly impacted. And what's interesting about that is we often talk about healthcare as a big driver of growth and employment in our state. It's an extremely important industry, and we've focused a lot of attention on building a talent supply in that industry. And a lot of that's because not only is it growing and responding to the growth in our population, but it tends to be relatively resistant to recessions. So what was a little bit different for this particular event is that we actually saw quite a bit of disruption in the healthcare industry. Most of that's probably temporary, as we're already seeing that coming back. But it's just important to notice that this is clearly something we've never seen before. We've never seen job losses like that in healthcare services in particular. So that was the over the year change between June 2019 and 2020. So you could see the impact of COVID-19 on the negative side. And this is the over the month change in jobs by industry from May to June. So this shows how we're coming back. So this is more detail on what I was showing at the top line level. And obviously with leisure and hospitality being the largest impacted, that's where we're seeing the most gains, followed by retail trade and professional business services and healthcare. So as I mentioned, businesses clearly started to open back up, and you can see that impact between May and June. I wanted to share another data set with you. So those are kind of our two core data sets that we release monthly. This is a new data set, and I think it's going to be really important as we move forward in understanding how COVID has impacted businesses. This data set is called the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey, and it's produced by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Right now, we only have data through March, so it's right before COVID really started to have an impact on our state. And you can see Florida is the orange line in the middle. And you can see that it was really growing. So businesses were advertising for jobs, they were hiring over the last decade at an increasing rate. And then it kind of leveled off in 2019, probably a reflection of the tightening labor market. So it'll be very interesting to see how businesses have responded to COVID. And we know from kind of anecdotal evidence that we've had a mixture of businesses that are having to lay off employees, but then there are also businesses that are finding new opportunities and need employees. So we'll be able to drill down into this and really see some great information in a couple of months. So next I wanted to share some work that we're doing at the Department of Economic Opportunity. I won't spend a whole lot of time on this particular graphic, but one of the most important data sets that we have in understanding the impacts of COVID in real time is our reemployment assistance claims data. So this is the dashboard that's available on our website, and it provides details on the number of claims DEO has received and processed. We update this dashboard daily, and you can see it shows which claims have been filed for each program and how much money we are able to pay individuals who are claiming their benefits. But where we find a lot of value in this data for understanding labor market impacts is on how the reemployment assistance claims are distributed by industry. And so we can actually see which industries are impacted and have individuals claiming for benefits at higher rates. So this gets a little bit more granular than what we shared before from our monthly survey data. And you can see very clearly that as of mid-June, it was the arts, entertainment, and recreation industry that was impacted most, followed by accommodation and food services. So we continue to look for ways to use this information to understand where people are and how they're impacted. So this also is looked at by county across the state, and we can see which counties were actually impacted the most. So there are additional dashboards and information on our website that break this information down and allow us to see what those trends are, both by industry and for local areas. So we've talked about how industries, how businesses have been impacted by COVID, and I wanted to switch my focus a little bit here to something that we talk about quite a bit, and this is what our future expectations are for employment growth. So this was actually produced last year, so it doesn't include any impacts from COVID-19. But this is a sense of the fastest growing industries in our state and where we expect employment to grow over the next decade. So as I mentioned earlier, healthcare and social assistance is a very large industry. It's a fast growing industry in our state. And it's still important to come back to this and see where the growth potential is going to continue to be even as we recover from COVID-19. So I wanted to switch gears a little bit here and talk about just how individuals are impacted by COVID-19 and what we've seen with some broader economic indicators. So one thing we're tracking is the loss of income individuals have seen since about mid-March in Florida. So we can look at it a variety of ways. We just wanted to look at how individuals are impacted differently based on their education level. And so you can see clearly those with a bachelor's degree or higher are, while impacted, they're impacted much less than those who have less than a high school. And that's really reflected in the industry data that we looked at earlier. Since many individuals who are employed in the leisure and hospitality industries are going to be at either a high school or less than high school, many of them are students. So that just makes a lot of sense, but you can clearly see it here. And we can watch this over time to see how those trends change, particularly in light of the different economic stimulus benefits that have been provided. So we also really closely track the Florida Consumer Sentiment Index. This is something that gives us a sense of how individuals perceive economic conditions and how that might play into their own household decisions. This shows you the trends over time. You can see that it's a pretty noisy series. It moves around a lot. And so we kind of take a month over month change with a grain of salt, but those longer term trends are really important to look at and can often indicate a greater economic shift. You can see it starts to decline right before a recession, pretty much every time. So consumers are really good at predicting recessions in some ways. So we've highlighted the top line index value, and then also if it's a good time to buy a major household good. And I've kind of zeroed in on more recent data here, and you can see February, things were looking really good. People were really optimistic. And then as of April, they were the most pessimistic they've been since the series began in terms of purchasing a major household item. Things are starting to move back up though. So as of June, the index is coming back, and this is something that's pretty sensitive to news and changes in other economic conditions. So we'll continue to monitor this and see how positive individuals are about their prospects for major purchases and their economic conditions in the future. And finally, one of the, I think, most interesting and probably most important things for us to focus on as we understand the impacts to consumers is consumer spending. So this chart highlights how individuals have changed their spending patterns since COVID-19 started to impact businesses in our state. And so we started January 2020 at 0, and then you can see relative to that time period how individuals have changed their spending. So dramatic declines in April, people really tightened up, and this would include even spending online. So really a lot of uncertainty during that period, and that continued through the month of April till about the last week of the month. And then folks became a lot more optimistic as stimulus payments were distributed and people had a better sense of what their income would be over this period. So you can see a major jump there and a continued increase in consumer spending, which continues to show some level of encouragement and sense that things are going to continue to improve. So this is, again, something that we will continue to monitor, but I think you can see something I wouldn't have expected is that consumer spending is pretty close back to the January 2020 level. It's about 5% down from that level as of just a few days ago. So we'll continue to monitor, and I think this is a great economic indicator on how folks are actually responding to their situation, both from an employment perspective, but then also from a sense of how things are going with recovery from the pandemic. And so that's all that I had to share with you. I'm happy to answer any questions, and feel free to reach out to me if you are interested in more local data or have any other questions or data needs.
So thank you, Adrienne. Just doing a little bit of technical switch over here. I, for one, am excited to see some of the positive trends in the data, particularly the rebound of some of the industries that have been most affected, and also the consumer spending. That's not something that I would have ever really thought about, but I think that that's really great and positive for our state. So thank you for that. We've had several questions come in that we're going to address in just a few minutes, and also some questions about whether the slides will be available. And I wanted to remind everybody that yes, we will have the recording of the webinar, which will include the slides, which will be posted on our website next week, and we will let all of you know when that occurs. So before we get into questions and answers, we have just a little bit more of the data highlights from our Disability, Inclusion and Employment Trends Survey. So again, just to remind you, we had over 600 responses to the survey. And 81% of the people who responded feel that persons with disabilities perform the same as persons without disabilities on the job. And 15% reported that people with disabilities perform better than people without disabilities. Only 12% of the respondents thought that it's more expensive to hire a person with a disability, and 85% are expecting that hiring a person with a disability costs the same as hiring a person without a disability. So again, I want to thank each of you who took the time to complete the survey, and also thank you for helping us push the survey out to your own audiences. We really believe that the results that we got can help to inform all of our work for years to come. And as I've said, you can expect to receive a full report of the results in August, and we encourage you to share the data and use it in your own decision-making around hiring, rehiring, and the rebuilding of Florida's economy. So as promised, we have some time for questions and answers. The first question I'm going to pose is to Adrienne, so I'm going to give you a second to come off of mute. And the question is, our county unemployment data shows initial claimants by industry with the category none given as the highest claimant. Can you address why and what is being done to classify these claims per industry?
Yes, that's a great question. So as soon as we knew that we were going to have an influx of claims come into our system, we wanted to create a dashboard that in real time, as much as real time as we can do, would provide that kind of information. And so to do that, we're relying on the information reported by individual claimants. And they self-report the business that they were employed in prior to separation. Some of those claimants are unable to identify their employer, or they choose not to at the time of registration. Some of them are self-employed, and so that system works a little bit differently. So right now we do not have an employer or an industry for them. However, our plan is to go back and match claimants to their employer and pull that information in the future. So stay tuned. We do plan to kind of shore that up and show what that true distribution looks like in the future.
Thanks, Adrienne. And I just have a quick follow-up, so don't take yourself off mute yet. So as this question pointed out, you all have data available at the county level. For those who are on the webinar that may not know how to access that, can you give them a little bit of instruction on that?
Absolutely. So our website is floridajobs.org. And when you go to our website, there's a link at the very top for workforce statistics, and you can find all of our information there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Adrienne. So I have a couple of questions for Heather. So I'll give you a second to come off of mute while I'm asking the question. So we had a question specifically about older workers, age 50 and above. And if you have any information about specific supports for supporting older workers that are already in the workforce, and also for helping older workers getting back into the workforce.
Great question. So one thing to consider, age discrimination actually starts at 40. So while most people will think of 50 or older as our older workforce, be careful about who you might assign to that area. As far as information for the older workers who are in the workplace or getting back into the workplace, I certainly recommend training options for them. I think that's one of the hurdles, with or without truth behind it, depending on the jobs that you're looking at, that they might not have the technology skills, as an example, or might not be as up to speed with certain platforms or systems. So if that's something that your organization can offer either in-house or provide resources to those workers, certainly recommend that. With our older workforce, or our seasoned employees, as we like to call them, they bring an amazing amount of those soft skills, which are critical to any position. So while there might be some training that needs to be done, what they bring in experience and from their past and different positions that they've held is going to be a great benefit to any organization.
Thanks, Heather. And I have one more question. One of the data points that I didn't highlight, but will tell you about from the survey, is that respondents said 21% of the respondents said that they're actively recruiting persons with disabilities. So Heather, I wanted to get your perspective on what you would recommend to the HR professionals that are here on the call today, as well as the employment service providers who are hoping to connect with the HR professionals on some ideas for increasing recruitment of people with disabilities.
Absolutely. So the first resource that I showed of Employ Florida with their Abilities at Work program, as well as the local career source office, will be wonderful resources for you. And again, I recommend reaching out to your local SHRM chapter across the state, because they'll know about individual organizations right in your community or in other communities if you have multiple locations and might not be as familiar with recruiting in other parts of the state or other parts of the country.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather and Adrienne. And I have one other question. I haven't introduced yet today Tony Carvajal, who is the CEO and president of the Able Trust. He's been the one that's been crunching the numbers from our employment trends survey. And I wanted to ask him to come off of mute and maybe give us any special insights that he had. But I also wanted to ask Tony, was there any particular data point that indicated to you where more focused work needs to be done here in the state by both employers and employment service providers in working towards diversity and inclusion?
Allison, I thank you so much for asking that question, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to thank Adrienne and Heather here. They've done a great job, and there are a few other questions that we may not get to before the end of this program, but we'll stay in touch with anybody who asks something. And hopefully, if you're on this call, you are very interested into the idea of hiring persons with disabilities. I was excited about 600 folks that participated in this. At a high level, the most exciting thing to me was how broad the range of industries, size of enterprises was. We had private and public employers, and we had enough diversity in the data that we can parse it out by subsectors and provide guidance to the ABLE network, which you'll probably talk about in a little while, but it's going to be our B2B peer-to-peer tool. You asked the question, is there anything that I noticed that maybe encouraged me, but also things that we might work on? I think the data about how intensely people are focused not only on diversity and inclusion as a key part of their hiring, but particularly disability inclusion in that hiring and that interest there was very, very encouraging. You know, I've done enough surveys that we can talk about biases and stuff, but still it was fantastic to hear so many folks express that interest. On the other side of that, when we ask the question, why might somebody not hire somebody with a disability, I think we really start seeing what we all know is the big challenge, and that is how do we raise awareness about the importance of diversity and inclusion in the workplace, and how to change perceptions about persons with disabilities in particular. Let me highlight a few things. I was listening to a good friend of mine, J.R. Harding, which many of you on this webinar may know, yesterday, and he talked about that there's a $575 billion marketplace waiting to be accessed. And Allison, you started this call by highlighting that about 1 in 4 individuals in this country have a disability. Sometimes that's not visible. So they are not only probably very likely already part of our workforce, but they are most certainly part of our marketplace. When respondents were asked why they might not hire somebody with a disability, a few things that stood out was that the work can't be done by people with disabilities, and we're going to dive deeper into that. There are clearly some industries where not every individual is perfect for every opportunity. There's concerns about liability and accommodations costing too much, but we already know that, as most people responded, that accommodations actually are not all that expensive. And then there were some issues about the concern about the comfort of customers. And this one really hit me, no buy-in from management. We're going to be addressing these things, and we want to work with businesses that are on this webinar, as well as organizations across the state, to keep sharing awareness. Somebody in the chat mentioned something that really keeps me up at night, and that is, as we are in this high unemployment rate right now, how do we keep the hiring focus on persons with disability? The reality is, look, we all have to be thinking about everything we can do to get every Floridian back into work and competing for every opportunity that we can. We've got a lot of advantages as a state. I loved how Adrienne highlighted, not only where some of the stresses are, but where some of the opportunities are, and Heather highlighting some of the training tools and opportunities there. I think working together, we're going to keep the focus on diversity and inclusion, and particularly disability inclusion. But we need you to stay engaged with us. If you want to reach me at the Able Trust, it's tony@abletrust.org. That's the easiest way to reach me. And Allison, you probably only expected a minute or two out of me, but hopefully I gave you as much as I possibly could. I can't end my portion without thanking our partners at the Division of Vocational Rehab. And you've been watching our 2 great interpreters that are provided by them, as well as the closed captioning support from them. So thank you, Division of Vocational Rehab here in Florida, and so many other partners that work with us day in and day out. Allison, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, thank you, Tony. And I want to say a final thank you and echo what Tony said about Adrienne, Heather, really for your very powerful thought leadership around the current state of Florida's economy, and how it's now more important than ever for all of us to keep a strategic focus on diversity and inclusion. We know that a diverse and inclusive workforce is not just nice to have, but it really is imperative for the strength and health of our organizations and the overall economy of Florida. So I want to say thank you also to everybody who's joined us today. As Tony said, we've got close to 200 people on the call today, including business leaders, employment service providers, and we know that you all have a piece in helping us recover through the pandemic and make Florida's workforce even more inclusive for people with different abilities, disabilities, older workers, veterans, all of the people that we need to have in our workforces to make us healthier and more vibrant. Before we sign off today, I have a couple of announcements that I want to leave you with, and also remind you that the slides from today's presentation will be available on our website. You'll be notified of that when that occurs through email, and we encourage you to share this information with your staff, with your leadership teams, and with your partners as you're working to recover through the pandemic. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a series of business-related webinars that are coming up, 2 of which are here posted on the screen. The first is scheduled for August 13th at 1 p.m., and it will address working remotely. Our speaker will be Jeff Zabar, who is from chiefhomeofficer.com. The second one that we ask you to save the date for is scheduled for October the 8th at 1 p.m. It will address communicating in a crisis, and our speaker will be Karen Moore from the Moore Agency. So finally, and last reminder, we will have the recordings for today's discussion, including the slides, which will include Adrienne's slides and Heather's slides, because there's lots of really great information, data, and resources we know you want to access. We'll also be providing a key takeaway summary from today's event, which will be posted on our website as well. As Tony mentioned, we are building the ABLE Network, a business leadership exchange, which is a peer-to-peer business-to-business groups throughout the state, based at the local level, and also will have statewide focus as well. We encourage you to reach out to us if you want to be a part of the ABLE Network, but we will also be reaching out to you to provide invitations to join us, particularly if you're interested in being part of the grassroots leadership level at your local level. We'll also be providing a full report of the Disability and Inclusion and Employment Trends Survey in August. Tomorrow, you will receive a report of the highlights, and we encourage you to share that and use that in your own decision-making as we're moving through the pandemic and recovering here in Florida. Finally, you're invited to contact with our panelist, Adrienne Johnston, who can be reached at adrienne.johnston@deo.myflorida.com, and Heather Deyrieux, who you can reach at heather.deyrieux@hrflorida.org. So finally, I want to say thank you once again for joining us today. Please reach out to us as well at info@abletrust.org. We want to continue to hear your questions, your ideas, but even more importantly, we want to hear your success stories about how you're building a more diverse and inclusive workforce here in Florida. We want to celebrate your success and support the very important work that you're doing. So that's all we have for you today, and we wish you a good rest of the day. Thanks for being here.